in that. Just like the Prophet ﷺ used to say, أثني عليك ولا أحسن الثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. I praise you, and whilst I praise you, I recognize my deficiency in praising you. You are as you have praised yourself. Allah is as He has praised Himself. And also, all thanks is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one who is the source of all blessings. And peace and salutations upon the Messenger of Allah, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent as a mercy to all of the alameen. To begin, first of all, I remind myself and you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is tayyib, la yaqbalu illa tayyiba. Allah is good and only accepts good. And good means, first of all, in the amal salih, the best of amal salih is akhlasuha wa aswabuha. So Allah accepts the most sincerest and the most correct action. So I remind myself and you first about sincerity. We are here for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to study this knowledge amongst ourselves. Inshallah, you will teach me something that I miss, and inshallah I will try and teach you something that I have learned. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept that from us and to give us the fruits of our good actions in the Qiyamah. To begin, Allah tabarak wa ta'ala says in the Quran, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يرفع الله الذين آمنوا والذين أوتوا العلم درجات. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises in the dunya and the akhirah, because the ayah doesn't mention where. Allah raises those who He gives knowledge. يرفع الله الذين آمنوا والذين أوتوا العلم. Those who believe and those who have knowledge in ranks. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises the scholar in their rank, in their status, in the dunya and in the akhirah. We are going to speak about one of those great scholars, one of the greatest scholars in Islam, who, because of his fiqh, because of his study, because of what he wrote and left behind, that we have inherited from him, how he revolutionized and changed and rectified. Ibn Hazm, rahimahullah ta'ala, is one of the scholars of Andalus. When it mentions how one of the students, he says that when the great Imam, when he wrote to him, he says, وَلِدْتُ بِقُرْطَبَةٍ. I was born at the end. But can I ask one of those questions first? Somebody can tell me what the name of Ibn Hazm is. How many people have heard of Ibn Hazm? Everybody's heard of Ibn Hazm. Ibn Hazm, what is his name? We have such an illustrious past. We have inherited from our scholars something that no nation can boast. We don't even know the names of our scholars. But I don't blame you. That's the naqs on the part of those who are supposed to be giving tarbiyah, those who are supposed to be teaching. So I was going to give a prize to anybody who can give me the name of Ibn Hazm. There's mashallah, several prizes which have been given to me to give out, and I thought, well, this would be one of the best ones to give out. Somebody could give me the name of Ibn Hazm. How many people have seen a book? There's a book in English called Mountains of Knowledge. And I believe Ibn Hazm is one of those people whose tarjama is in that book. And that's in English. Nobody knows the name of Ibn Hazm. What's his kunya? Anybody knows his kunya? Yes. You know it? Go on then. You don't know it. Sorry? Are you joking with me? Ibn Hazm's kunya was Abu Muhammad. And his actual name was Ali. Ali ibn Ahmad ibn Sa'id ibn Hazm. So Ibn Hazm comes so much further up. But his nisbah to Ibn Hazm became something that he was known by. So Ali ibn Ahmad ibn Sa'id ibn Hazm. That was his name. And there is an issue that I want to mention in his name, Because you know, when there is somebody who is outstanding and somebody who is good, everybody wants to lay claim to them. Isn't that the case? Anybody who is really amazing and fantastic, everybody wants to be related to them, or everybody wants to have some link with them. Ibn Hazm is the same. Everybody wants to lay claim to Ibn Hazm, even the West. Even the West say, oh, Ibn Hazm was from us. Later he became a Muslim and became an Arabi and became so on and so forth. But originally he was from us. And of course there are some people who will say he is Arabi Asil. There's no doubt about how Arab he is. He's Arab right down to the bone, as some people say. From Bani Umayyah. But the truth is that when the Mu'arrikheen wrote, what seems to be apparent is that he originated, or his family's origins were from Bilad al-Faris. So he is Farisi. He was Farisi. SubhanAllah, look at that. Remind you of the statement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Inna Allah yarfa'u bihadha al-kitabi aqwaman wa yadha bihi akharin." Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raises with this book a people, and with the same book Allah lowers a people. SubhanAllah, you see some people, they weren't Arabs, but because of their link to this book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to this religion, to the sunnah of the Prophet, Allah gave them such a lofty status. And others who sat by the Kaaba and they held the keys of the Kaaba and they had nisbah to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah didn't guide them. So Allah raises with this book a people. Ibn Hazm is one of those examples. And before him, from the same Bilad al-Faris, Salman al-Farisi. And another people, Abu Lahab, is in Jahannam. So brothers and sisters, Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala raises a person and lowers a person based on his attachment to the book of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. How he is connected to the Arab world is that one of his forefathers, and his forefathers Ibn Hazm, Ibn Ghalib, Ibn Salih, Ibn Khalaf, Ibn Ma'dan, Ibn Sufyan, Ibn Yazid al-Farisi. One of his forefathers was he was raised in luxury and ease and comfort. He didn't see some of the difficulties that maybe some of the other Imams saw. And he also benefited because he had the opportunity, because money buys you many things. From amongst the things that it buys you is books, which you can benefit from. So he had, because of this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him this privilege that he was born in a family which had wealth, that he had the privilege to have books and to have learning. And very early in his life, he was known to be an adib. Was a person who was very eloquent, very literate. He read a lot of literature. And he used to say poems, which was of course something which was very popular in the courts of the Khulafa and in the courts where the ministers used to sit. And also it's mentioned about Ibn Hazm that he was one of those people who was raised in a home where there was a lot of women. And they had faragh, so there was an opportunity to learn and people to give him inayah and time. In fact, Ibn Hazm, it's mentioned about him that he was known for his adab, for his literature, and his command of language, before he was known for his fiqh. Later on he became known more for his fiqh than all of those other things. But originally, he was known as an adib. And in fact, one of the books that's mentioned about him, Tawq al-Hamam, is one of those famous books which some of the people have said that one of the best books which was written on the subject of love. So Ibn Hazm was one of those people, very early who was known for his many abilities. He wasn't just known in fiqh, but he was known in many abilities. And this reminds me of a very important point here. That the alim, or the person who takes the path of knowledge, one of the means to attain knowledge is the language. I remember listening to a cassette by our beloved scholar who passed away, Muhammad Nasruddin al-Albani rahmatullahi ta'ala alayh. And he was mentioning about how a person, when he starts to seek knowledge, that there are certain types of knowledge which are the knowledge which will cause him to arrive at understanding. And those he called ulum al-wasila, or the means to real knowledge. And then he mentioned amongst them 3 types of knowledge. First of all of those knowledge he mentioned was knowledge of the Arabic language. So you see, Ibn Hazm, right at the offset, was a scholar of the Arabic language. So if anybody wants to be a student of knowledge, to be a scholar, where does he start? One of the first things that he must be is a scholar of the Arabic language. Nahu, sarf, and adab, so on and so forth, all of those things. Because how will you understand the book of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala, and how will you understand the sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the correct understanding without knowing the Arabic language? Arabic language is a must. It's a must for every Muslim. So how about somebody who wants to take the path or seek the path? Once his madhab became well known and people knew about him, and especially the way he was always making munadarat, always making debates with other scholars. So he had a good knowledge of mantiq. Some of the scholars blamed him for that, saying that some of the ta'athir or some of the effects of that mantiq of falsafa that he learned had a bad impact in some ways on him. Al-Muhim, you find that Ibn Hazm was one of those people who became very well known because of his knowledge of fiqh. And how did he become known for his knowledge of fiqh? I think that a lot of people don't realize is that Ibn Hazm, there's a very beautiful story concerning him, how he came to learn al-fiqh. He was 26 years old when he first undertook the journey to study fiqh. And this is the reason why I particularly want to discuss fiqh, because many scholars, when they describe him, they say, Imam of the fuqaha. Not everybody will agree with that, but some of the scholars I've heard them give him this title, Imam al-fuqaha. Imam of the fuqaha, the jurists. One of his students, Abu Bakr Muhammad ibn Turkhan al-Turki, mentions that Ibn Hazm, when he was still only very young, the reason for him to learn or to make tabahr or to make ta'ammaq in the fiqh, to study fiqh in any great detail, was he once entered into the masjid to participate in a janazah. And when he entered the masjid, he sat down. And he didn't pray 2 rakat. So he came into the masjid and he sat down, he didn't perform 2 rakat. So a man said to him, قُمْ فَصَلِّ تَحِيَّةَ الْمَسْجِدِ. Stand up and pray 2 rakat. Greeting of the masjid. So Ibn Hazm, he didn't know. So he got up and he prayed 2 rakat. And after he prayed the Salat al-Janazah, and he came back from the Janazah, he says, I entered the masjid and I began to perform another 2 rakat. So he said to me, sit down. Sit down. This is not the time when it is allowed to pray the Janazah. So as a result of that, he says, فَانْصَرَفْتُ وَقَدْ حَزِنْتُ. He said, and he studied this because of what happened to him. If you look at this Imam, look at the himmah that he has. Because he made a mistake, or because he didn't know, it pushed him to study and to learn. It was a sabab for him to then enter into this field of al-fiqh. And look at the himmah that he has. For 3 years, he studied the book of Muwatta Imam Malik. I'm just going to pause 1 minute and just for us to concentrate or to reflect upon our lives. Some of you brothers in this room here, in this hall here, maybe I've known you for more than 20 years. Some of you brothers in here. And I remember some of you brothers that 20 years ago were saying to me, I'm going to learn the Arabic language. 20 years later, we're still saying it. Why? Because we don't have this himmah. We don't have this himmah to carry out what we're saying. And wallahi, every single person has the ability. There is nothing special that one person has that another doesn't have. And if you're going to say to me with the hujjah that, well, I can't study the Arabic language and you went to Saudi and you learned and that's why you learned and I'm still here. Wallahi, I have an English boy. He's still in his 20s. In 1 year, he learned the Arabic language. He became a Muslim, and very shortly after that, he learned the Arabic language. And wallahi, he refuses to speak to me in any other language except the Arabic language. And he is now at the moment, he rectifies or he corrects other people's qira'at. He said, you're making a mistake in your qira'ah. Do this, read like this, you're making a mistake here. Look at Ibn Hazm. He there was an issue of whether he should pray or not pray. That pushed him to learn. And look at his himmah. For 3 years, he sat at the foot of a scholar and learned from him. After 3 years, he began to speak. Our problem is that many times we want to speak and we're too quick to want to speak, but we haven't learned anything. What are we going to speak? So Ibn Hazm learned the fiqh of Imam Malik. And after he learned the fiqh of Imam Malik, he moved on to the fiqh of Imam Shafi'i. He didn't study the fiqh of Imam Malik for 3 years, and the fiqh of Imam Shafi'i for 18 years, and the fiqh of Imam Dawud al-Zahiri for so many years until you became a mujtahid. So you don't have the right to say that. When Ibn Hazm says that, he has the right to say it because he was a mujtahid. Mutafannin. You look at him, he read the tafsir of Imam al-Qurtubi to one of the scholars, read it to him. And that reading means understanding and memorizing, because one of the things which is known about all of these people, when we talk about the seerah of any of these scholars, that they were people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them intelligence which was not common, extraordinary. In fact, you find him, one of the stories which is mentioned about Ibn Hazm, is that one day he was passing in the street and he met a man who was a Jewish man in the Zubala. He was just some peasant. And he saw the Imam and he stopped him. He said, can I ask you a question? So the Imam stopped to listen to his question. So he said to him that your Prophet has said, and then he mentioned a hadith of the Prophet, ad-dunya sijnul mu'min wa jannatul kafir. That the earth or the dunya is the Jannah of the disbeliever, and it is the sijn or the jail of the believer. So he said, yes, our Prophet did say that. So he asked him, how can that be? Look at where you live. You live in a palace, you live in such luxury, and you're a Muslim. And look at me. I'm a disbeliever, and look where I'm living, in the Zubala. Your Prophet, what he said is not right. What do you think the Imam's answer was? There's a book, whoever gets the answer. Yeah. Barakallahu feek. What do you want? Fundamentals, 3 fundamentals or Kitab al-Tawheed? تفضل يا أخي. What's your name, أخي? Ahmed. أهلا وسهلا أحمد. بارك الله فيك. Did you understand the answer? The answer is basically that where he is now in respect to that, the believer will have better. So even if he's living very well in the dunya, what is to come from him will even be better. And as for the kafir, what is to come for him will be worse. If you look at the other madhabs, what they use as proofs, of course, the book of Allah Ta'ala, and the sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu, and of course, also consensus of the scholars ijma'. But also one of the things that they used as proof was qiyas. What is qiyas? When we talk about qiyas is? Who said analogy? Explain me what you mean by analogy. I don't want to put you on the spot, but you said analogy, so What do we understand from analogy? Maybe somebody might not understand what analogy means. Sorry? Okay, yes. Maybe, yes. We look at two situations. One where there is a text and one there isn't a text. But those situations we find amongst them common factors. Because the common factors are so numerous, we say this is like this. So because they are so similar, they have so many common factors, as a result of that, the hukm for something which we know there's a text for, we apply the same hukm to the next thing. This is in brief what qiyas is. And don't think now that you've heard this from me, this definition, now you know what qiyas is. Qiyas is something which scholars study and teach and learn. So this is something which is a very in-depth subject. But this is just for you to have an understanding. This is what qiyas is. Common factors between two issues. There are so many common factors that they liken them to one another. And this is why you meant analogy. So this is qiyas. So the Zahiriyya, they rejected this type of proof. They said qiyas, as far as we're concerned, doesn't exist. There's no such thing as qiyas. They were very purist in their approach to fiqh. They said, the only proof is what Allah said and what His Prophet said, and nothing else is proof. And when we understand those texts, we understand them, what is apparent of them. There's no reading between the lines. That's it. And in general, that seems like a very good idea. That seems perfectly correct. But then, as a result of that, there were so many mafasid, so many things which were taken against the Zahiriyya and Ibn Hazm because of this approach. And as a result of that, Ibn Hazm, some of the people began to blame him. Because of this approach, some of the people began to blame him. Because one of the things that the Zahiriyya said, the Prophet said in a hadith, this is an example, one of the things which is said about the Zahiriyya. The Prophet said, لا يبولن أحدكم في الماء الدائم. No, it's not allowed for one of you to urinate in the water which is standing. You find that Ibn Hazm throughout his whole life, he was making many munadharat with people. He was always making munadharat with people because of this approach that he had. And as a result of that, so many times his books were burnt. And some of the scholars spoke against him. I have one example. I'm only going to use this one example to speak just to mention. And this is just as an example. Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, Ali Abi Muhammad fi kitab al-Qawasim al-Hawas. He mentions about the Zahiriyya. So he says such strong words about the Zahiriyya and Ibn Hazm. He says, Ummatun sakhifa. And of course, I don't agree with this. But this was his opinion. And I just want to demonstrate that because of his approach to fiqh, and because he took out qiyas, some of the scholars, they disapproved of him and reprimanded him and his madhab. So they said, Hiya ummatun sakhifa. They are of no value. They are people who have shallow understanding. And then he says concerning them that they took what they learned in terms of their fiqh and everything, they took it from talaqawhu min ikhwanihim al-khawarij. So he likens Ibn Hazm and people like Ibn Hazm al-Zahiriyya to the Khawarij. Because what did the Khawarij say to Ali? They said, al-hukmu, there's no hukm except for Allah. Al-hukmu lillahi tabarak wa ta'ala. So it's not allowed for any men to make hukm. They were saying, what they were saying in essence was right. But the meanings that they were, or the way that they were understanding was incorrect. So this great scholar Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, he reprimands the Zahiri and he said so many things about them. And then he blames them that you see how that they have filled, how he said, وَجَدْتُ الْقَوْلَ بِالظَّاهِرِ قَدْ مَلَأَ بِهِ الْمَغْرِبِ سَخِيفٌ كَانَ مِنْ بَادِيَةِ إِشْبِيلِيَّةِ يُعْرَفُ بِإِبْنِ حَزْمٍ. Even he says that I found that the statements of the Zahiriyya has filled all of this North African area. And he says it is Sakhif, it is little Haqir. And even there are some areas which are known in the body of Ishbiliya, they are known as Ibn Hazm. Even though he blames him and says those things about him, you see how the impact of Ibn Hazm's madhab was so vast that all of the people took to the madhab. And it's mentioned about him that Ibn Hazm, about knowledge, like the example of al-Muhalla of Ibn Hazm. And then he says the second one, Kitab al-Mughni, the book of called al-Mughni, which is in the Hanbali madhab by Sheikh Muwaffiq ad-Din Ibn Qudama. He says, I never saw two books of knowledge in the whole of the Islamic Turath like these two books. Imam al-Dhahabi, whose book we're narrating a lot of this from, Imam al-Dhahabi says, قُلْتُ, I said, لَقَدْ صَدَقَ الشَّيْخُ الدِّينِ, indeed he's spoken truthfully, Sheikh Izzuddin. But then he adds, وَثَالِثُهُمَا سُنُنُ الْكُبْرَى or سُنُنُ الْكَبِيرِ لِلْبَيْحَقِ وَرَابِعُهَا التَّمْهِيدِ لِابْنِ عَبْدِ الْبَرِّ. He adds to them two other books. He says, I would add to them the third one, Sunan al-Kabir, I think it's Sunan al-Kubra of Imam al-Bayhaqi, Sunan al-Kubra. And that is printed, and a Tamheed, which is by the famous scholar who is also from the scholars of this area, Ibn Abdul Barr. He says, I would add to them these two books, which reminds me of the time when we were students. And you know, when you're students, not every student has lots of funds to buy all the books. So he has to, when the fair comes, the book fair comes and he's going to choose his books, he has to try and choose what will, what he can do without and what he can't do without. And of course, who's he going to ask for advice? His teachers and his professors. So I remember one of the professors when he was advising in terms of buying books of fiqh. Now you could look for books of fiqh, and every madhab has hundreds of books of fiqh. So which ones are you going to buy? You can't buy them all. Even if you financially you could buy them all, where would you put them all? And how would you transport them all? So it's very difficult. So when we asked one of our professors, we said, can you suggest what books a talib al-ilm could buy that would suffice him, that he wouldn't need to buy any other books? And, of course, you ask in tafsir, and you ask in hadith, and you ask so on and so forth. We asked him in fiqh, what would you suggest? He said, I would suggest to you that if any student were to buy, and then he mentioned, from amongst the books that he mentioned was the book Al-Muhalla. And from amongst the books that he mentioned was Tamheed. And from amongst the books that he mentioned was Ibn Qudama's Al-Mughni, and also Al-Majmu' or either one of them of the Shafi'i madhab. So you see, subhanAllah, even Nadarat with scholars, when he was debating with scholars, he would debate with a scholar and he would say to him that the proof that you're using is da'if. Often he would find that the proof that you're saying is da'if. And that would be the end of the munadara. But then he would say, لَوْ سَلَّمْنَا جَدَلًا, which is some of the scholars say nowadays, that even if we were to say now that your proof is correct, but it's wrong because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So he would tell them, even if your proof was wrong, even if your proof was authentic, it's wrong because of 1, 2, 3, 4. And even his understanding, his fiqh, his understanding of the text was amazing. And this is why the book Al-Muhalla of Ibn Hazm became so popular. That the scholars of the past and the present, all of them, they suggest that it should be read. But they always give a word of warning. What's the word of warning? They say it's not the first book to start off with. In fact, the scholars, the ulama say that after you read all of the other books, the last book to read is the Muhalla of Ibn Hazm. After you read all of the other books, then you read this book. It's not for the new talib al-ilm. And this is one of the problems today. Student of knowledge starts to learn a little bit. So what does he do? He starts with the hardest books. Where he should end, that's where he starts. So what's going to happen? He's going to get lost in the way. He's going to get lost in the way. One of the other reasons why Ibn Hazm, you find that a lot of the scholars blamed him, and there is a method which is said about him, which I only say here because we're discussing Ibn Hazm, was that Ibn Hazm was a man who had a very sharp tongue. May Allah have mercy on him and may Allah forgive him. That they used to say, Lisanu Ibn Hazm وَسَيْفُ حَجَّاجٍ شَقِيقَيْن. They used to say that the tongue of Ibn Hazm and the sword of Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. Hajjaj ibn Yusuf was one of those people who was known when he came to Iraq, how he killed so many people. He was known in his time that he was very barbaric. Some of the scholars, they made a tab of him when they wrote in history about him, that how he was a tyrant. So when people give an example of harshness, they say the tongue of Ibn Hazm, because Ibn Hazm was like that. One of the things that we know is al-jaza'u min jins fi'lihi. Whatever you do unto others, it will be done unto you. So when you speak harshly against others, then they will speak harshly against you. And this is why we said, Ibn Hazm, some of the scholars, they spoke harshly against him. As we saw, one of the examples, I didn't want to read the rest of it. Very harsh language. Rarely do you find somebody speak about another scholar like this. And that was because Ibn Hazm and the way he would speak. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon him. He was, as we say, even though all of these things said about him, Ibn Hazm was one of the greatest fuqaha that lived. You find, subhanallah, because of his ability to understand texts, you find him that, subhanallah, many of the scholars, they would say that I wouldn't give a fatwa on an issue until I have read what Ibn Hazm has said in Muhalla. So we are all new students of knowledge, so if we can to read al-Muhalla, we should take it easy. And we should also consult with a scholar before we apply a fatwa of any sort. But brothers and sisters, what are we learning from the seerah of Ibn Hazm, who incidentally, because we're coming to the end of it, died in the year 456 Hijri. Ibn Hazm, we find him that he was a man who had very high himmah. This is something which is common to all the scholars, that he strove to be, or strove for excellence. You know how often we find ourselves, we belittle ourselves, or we hold ourselves in little esteem. And this is incorrect. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us all the ability. There is no reason why we can't learn the Arabic language. There's no reason why we can't memorize the Quran. There's no reason why we can't recite like somebody else recites, or we become scholars. The thing which holds us back is this qaid that we have around our neck saying, but maybe I can't do it, and I'm not going to be able to do that. I know a brother, I want to conclude with this because my brother is telling me a few minutes ago that there was 10 minutes left. And I told him I was going to finish early, and you know, Imams, they can talk for a long time. A friend of mine used to work in London. He used to commute to work, and his commuting was 2 hours. The truth recognized to be true and give us the ability to act on it, and also make us a people, when we hear the falsehood, recognize to be false and give us the ability to avoid it. Jazakumullah khairan. We have 2 prizes still left. Out of the hadith that I quoted, can anybody quote me 1 hadith back? If you quote me a hadith back from the hadith that I mentioned, even in English, I'll give you a prize. First person. Yes. Barakallah feek. You can have the 3 fundamental principles. What's your name, Akhi? Umar. Barakallah feek. Do you have this book? So alhamdulillah, you'll benefit from this book, learning it and teaching it, inshallah. What question? What shall we ask? What was the name of Ibn Hazm? And I don't want just his first name. I want up till Ibn Hazm. Up to Ibn Hazm. Yeah. La. Yes. Ibn? Barakallah feek. That's the last prize. Tafadhal. What's his name again? Everybody? Ali